Hello, it's so lovely to be here with you today. Thank you so much to APEC and to all our hosts for having me here to speak.
Thank you so much. We are very honored to have you as well. Okay, so you're joining us today, and it's our pleasure to invite you for an interview conversation to learn your insights and perspectives. So, as someone who has a wealth of experience insight in clinical trials at industry, I would like to start off our conversation by asking, what does the DCT means to you, and what areas are you focused on right now?
Thank you so much for that question. As you mentioned, I have over 2 decades of experience in clinical trial operations recently in running infectious disease and vaccine. And I also lead my company's initiative to offer an optional electronic investigator study file software to all MSD sites. And I'm involved in a couple initiatives to advance decentralized trials within our company. So I always like to start talking about, like, what does DCT mean to different people? What does it mean to me? If we say DCT, it can mean different things to different people. Some people will be thinking about wearable devices or telehealth technology. Or electronic diaries or patient-reported outcomes. I have a lot of experience with those in the areas where I work. We could be talking about endpoint data collection, or the DCT element of the trial might simply be a new means to conduct procedures that we always do. For example, we always do informed consent as the part of clinical trials, but we might be doing an electronic consenting, so now it's a decentralized procedure. So just a new way of doing something we've always done before. I also like to make the distinction between those digital elements, electronic diaries, wearable devices, new endpoints, and those elements of decentralized trials that are non-digital. And here I'm thinking about having a new investigator site location in a new or satellite location. We might say a pop-up location built on demand to meet a particular need. We might be talking about a mobile clinic or RRV, or we could be talking about using new locations like retail pharmacies as part of the clinical trial environment. So DCT can mean lots of things. I am not a data or device expert, so I'm more involved in non-digital aspects of decentralized trials.
Okay, thank you so much. Just like you said that you have a lot of experiences in this area. So can you please tell us about how you got involved in DCT for your company and what your experience has been?
Yeah, so thank you. As I mentioned, I've been part of this initiative at my company to provide electronic investigator study file. So this is the regulatory or essential documents. And it's not necessarily that the conduct of the trial is being done in a decentralized way, but I do like to talk about this because it's been an important tool for us to maintain our responsibility as sponsor to provide oversight of the clinical trial when political disruptions, even wars or natural disasters, have prevented our staff from traveling to research sites. And I see increasingly that eSource, having an electronic method of collecting the source documentation and making that accessible to the different people participating in the clinical trial, is an important part of any DCT plan. And why is that? It's because you don't want to be recording things on paper and then trying to get the paper from one place to another. That doesn't make sense. And we also don't want people using their personal mobile devices. I don't want to take a picture of myself on my cell phone of a piece of paper and text it. That's not secure or private or compliant. So having an eSource solution that everybody in the decentralized trial has access to, I see as an important part of the DCT ecosystem. And in my global work on electronic investigator file, I've seen how there is a lot of evolving regulatory guidance coming out of the pandemic. most governments gave temporary permissions during the pandemic for the remote review of essential documents, which is to say they gave field monitors or CRAs access, permission to, if we couldn't get on site because the hospital was shut down because of the pandemic. So those temporary permissions often came through for both essential documents and source documents for remote monitoring. But whether those permissions have continued in today's regulatory environment varies greatly from country to country and region to region. So we found in our global work that in Ukraine, in the United States, in Latin America, the regulatory environment is quite supportive of remote monitoring and electronic source. But in the European Union, we found more obstacles to the use of electronic investigator study files and the exchange of documents. And privacy concerns, particularly again in the European Union, mean that the online storage or remote review of source documents may be constrained. And a key consideration here is data localization. Does the country or the region have a requirement that the data is stored or warehoused within a particular geographic region? So another aspect of my experience has to do with my company's long history with e-diaries. And we can think of e-diaries as maybe one of the earliest forms of decentralized trials. Many of you may have experience using electronic diaries for years and years. They've been around for a long time. And I like to talk about a case example here that I think can show us how changing to digital data collection changes the expectation for oversight and what the regulatory or health authority might ask of us. So here's my example. For years and years in my company, we would give out paper diaries, and after 14 days or 28 days, whatever the data collection period was for those patients, usually post-vaccination, whatever the period of data collection was for the particular vaccine, at the end of that data collection period, our protocols used to mandate a patient visit. That is, we would ask the patient to come back to the clinic to bring their paper diary to us so that it could be reviewed by the study coordinator. Well, now, because we have e-diaries, we conduct that diary review over the telephone using the electronic data. But particularly in vaccines, our electronic diaries collect adverse event information. And that adverse event information is available almost immediately after the patient enters it. So in the old world in paper, we might not talk to that patient for 28 days after their vaccination. But in the new world with electronic diaries, the data exists in the cloud, it's uploaded from the patient diary. There's an expectation that the investigator is reviewing that adverse event data contemporaneously, is discussing the events with the patients, and making clinical judgments well before that phone visit occurs to discuss the diary data. So for me, there's a key takeaway that for compliance that comes out of our work with electronic diaries, and that is that when we move to digital, we need to ask ourselves, does the way we're collecting the data change the expectation for who will review it, when it will be reviewed, or what actions will be taken? So I'll share a little bit more, if I may, in answer to that question. When the pandemic hit, I saw so many things, as did you, a lot of creativity and innovation in conducting clinical trials. In my country, there were mobile clinics rolled up to meatpacking plants and senior care facilities to enroll in COVID vaccine trials. And you may have seen similar in your own country. And I thought this was simply amazing, and wanted to understand how we could deliver quality with these novel environments. And I'm also very passionate about clinical trial accessibility, making clinical trials available to everyone to at least consider whether they're right for them. So very interested in this kind of innovation. So I was privileged, this is the first case study at Merck that I will share with you. Merck, known as MSD outside the US, that in our COVID treatment trials, we wanted to get the word out about the trial and to meet patients where they were at, to present them with the opportunity to think about the clinical trial at a time that was relevant to them. So what you're seeing here are pictures of our mobile clinic, or this is a converted recreational vehicle here, and and this is the inside, and we partnered with a site and a third-party staffing service, and we took this RV to a testing center. And this was one of those testing centers where people would line up very early in the morning in very long lines along the sidewalk to get a COVID test before they went to work. And we would raise the awning and put out a little table, put out some sandwich boards, some signs on the sidewalk to talk about the what a clinical trial is, to talk about the clinical trial opportunity. And what we saw is over 9,000 people came up to the unit in the months that we were deployed to have some kind of conversation with the trained clinical staff there. And then we shared information about what a clinical trial is, what kinds of questions a patient might want to ask before participating in a clinical trial. And then if they were interested in learning more, we shared flyers with for the study and connected them to a local research investigator. So we consider this community engagement work to be on the low risk end of the spectrum of what we might do for decentralized trials, because we did not do any consenting at the mobile unit, and we did not do any study procedures at the mobile unit. So this is really just community engagement, education, information about clinical trials happening. Another thing we tried in the in those COVID studies was the use of home health. And you may be, familiar with the concept of home health. A traveling home nurse would go to the patient's home. And the idea was we hope to remove burden for the patients, for them to come to the clinic. But in fact, we found this was quite challenging. Some patients did not want a stranger to come to their home and felt that this would be an intrusion. Others simply felt strongly that they wanted to come and see their physician and receive that face-to-face conversation from their treating physician. So it was very patient-specific, and I think an ideal protocol might allow a patient to choose. For example, they're coming up on visit 3. Do they want to go in for that visit? Would they like someone to come and do their blood draw at home and maybe pick? But it's very challenging logistically for sites and sponsors. We need time to plan, to train individuals, to make sure they have the right information. So while we offered a third-party home health service, in fact, many of our investigators were not interested in pursuing it. And when they did, their patients were not interested in. So we saw the adoption rate was quite low in our COVID trials. And then the last kind of case example from my experience that I'll share here, how I've come to be here talking to you today, is obviously the dream or the vision is that maybe we could be doing clinical trials in a mobile clinic in places where we do not have a permanent research hospital or research facility. So you're seeing here some photos. I'm in some of these photos modeling what the patient might look like here in the small exam room inside the clinic. But we have been exploring what this would look like if to conduct the trial from end to end, beginning to end, from consenting to the very last procedure and phone call, only and exclusively within the mobile unit.
Thank you. So your company most likely working on that mobile clinical trial conduct. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, we are working on this. Mm-hmm. We are trying to figure out how this will look and explore pilots.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then hearing those case studies, in your opinion, what are some of the key areas of concern in terms of compliance with conducting DCTs?
Yeah, thank you. So I think that we have to build our risk plans for our trials based on the known risks. And what's really challenging here is that we don't know what we don't know. When we are innovating and trying something new, it can be very hard to figure out what the risks are going to be. So we have to come together, we have to brainstorm, we have to think about it and build risk plans. What do we think the risks were going to be? And then given those risks that we, at least the ones that we can imagine, what could we do differently to monitor based on those risks? I think that's what I hear from agencies when, so much in guidance around the world talking about risk-based monitoring. So let's define our risks, and then let's build our monitoring plan around those. Decentralized trials have unique risks. If we're talking about a mobile clinic, will it be able to control the investigational product at temperature? Will it have a stable power supply? If the principal investigator is based in the hospital and the mobile clinic is someplace else in the field, how are they talking to each other? And how does principal investigator oversight function? So this concept of a virtual principal investigator, an investigator who is from a distance overseeing the clinical trial, really increases our burden for documenting principal investigator oversight, and we have to think very carefully. And I think with so much innovation and new suppliers in this field, one of the things that we're asking a lot of questions about is who's going to be that investigator? Are they at least as qualified by training and experience as the investigators we would select at our traditional sites? Another risk might be, what does retention look like? We don't know today what procedures patients will accept, right? So will they accept the novel procedures? Will they like the new decentralized elements that we're putting at them? Will they like going to the mobile clinic? Will they like the new wearable device that we give to them? So we may not have benchmarking or experience to know what the patient acceptance is going to be and what we should expect in terms of retention in the trial. But we all know we want to keep our patients in our trials and to the end to deliver the data and the endpoints. So I was, so I'll pause there. Thank you. I think I jumped ahead.
Okay. All right. So the next question is that what have been important DCT consideration in the US and the global regulatory environment? Can you give us some of the idea of these questions, please?
Yeah, thank you. So I think some of the things that I have heard discussed most often, and there are many, but I'll mention the ones we've discussed most often in the global environment. If we're considering a new wearable or a DCT element for an endpoint, is the health authority in the local area accepting of that technology or that new endpoint? Are they accepting of the novel approach that we might take? Have they given any signals or opinions? I mentioned before, data localization and privacy are incredibly important when we're talking particularly about international clinical trials. How is that PI oversight accomplished for the decentralized procedure, whether it's a mobile clinic or a home health nurse or a different setup for collecting local labs? How is the PI knowing what's happening? Do we have good plans? Do the sites have good plans for PI oversight? And do we as sponsor have good plans for confirming that the investigator oversight plan is adequate and is being followed? I've also heard within my country where investigators have to sign a particular form, the 1572, to affirm their oversight of the trial. Many investigators have told me that they don't like having to manage third-party suppliers. So if the sponsor hires a home health group, and then we say the investigator is responsible for overseeing those nurses, some investigators say to us, I don't want to oversee this. I didn't pick this supplier. I didn't qualify this supplier. You, the sponsor, picked them. Why aren't you in charge of them? Like, why am I having to oversee them? So when the structure of a clinical trial gets more complicated like this, we have to think about what are the models for accountability, I think, for the DCT element. And this is something that I think that we will hear more about in the future. Are there different ways of setting up that accountability? Could, for example, the first visits be done in the hospital with the traditional investigator with then a handoff for follow-up visits to a different investigator who would oversee the perhaps virtual or remote follow-up. That's one way we might have more than one investigator, but I think finding some way for those third-party suppliers to be more accountable for their delivery, instead of making the individual investigators responsible. This is an evolving area of discussion, and I don't think we have quite solved the puzzle yet.
Okay. What can you share about the challenges that you face in implementing the DCT's elements?
Yeah, there have been a few because everything is new. And as I said, we don't know what we don't know. I think I mentioned the patient experience, right? So I think we sometimes propose a solution or come up with a DCT element thinking that it's going to make the trial easier for the patient. And then in fact, we find it's more complicated or the patient does not experience that as helpful. So inserting a DCT element does not necessarily make the trial more patient-centric. So I'll come back to the paper diary example again. We used to do paper diaries and a visit at the end of the collection period to ensure the diary was complete. In theory, the removal of that visit reduced patient burden. A couple years ago, I did a study where we worked with an investigator in a very rural area. And what we found is that none of those patients could transmit their diary data from home because they did not have Wi-Fi. And so they all had to drive back into the city and park outside the investigator's site in the town center or at the public library where there was public Wi-Fi in order for their diaries to transmit. So we think this is super helpful, but in fact, they still had to come to town anyway. And meantime, the study coordinator has called them 15 times to ask them why they haven't completed their diaries, which they had completed, but they simply hadn't been able to transmit them. So digital may not increase the accessibility or reduce the burden on patients. It may just bring a different burden. And then, with the mobile unit, there were some studies in the media with some discussion in the media about a different study with a different sponsor where, they found they had problems if they lost power, so then they have to have a generator. They need Wi-Fi to use their e-source solution. Maybe you have to fall back to paper. Does the centrifuge work if you don't have power? So thinking about all of these things about power sources and internet and decentralized trials. And then I mentioned before the virtual PI oversight, those plans have to be extremely robust. All of these elements take more time. So there's a time investment by the teams to work to qualify third-party suppliers, to evaluate the technology or the service, to co-develop manuals. For example, home health requires nursing manuals. That's extra time for our teams when we're already very busy. And then extra oversight, additional quality checks and governance for novel procedures. All of this comes into bear. So I think those are some of the main challenges that we have seen. And you'll see here too, I've got privacy up here, just thinking about those systems, right? So if there's a transmission or a collection of patient data, whether that's telehealth or it's just our CRAs doing remote oversight, we have to think deeply about what systems are being used. Are they validated and compliant? Do they have audit trails? All of those things come into play even more with a decentralized solution.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Now, you have shared about the experiences and also the challenges and the risk management. In closing, what advice do you have for parties exploring DCT?
Yeah, I think to synthesize some of the things I've been talking about today, I would say if you're looking at DCT, give your teams extra time. They're going to need time to assess the option to make sure that the solution does in fact address the stated objective. If that objective is patient-centric, I would suggest talking to patients about whether they think this is helpful. I am starting to become a big believer in building a dedicated or centralized, decentralized team within the site or the sponsor to assess and oversee novel approaches. We can learn something in one space, virtual PI oversight for a mobile unit, and then apply it to virtual PI oversight for a retail pharmacy or a different model. So I think we can get ourselves into trouble if we make every team, we say in English, reinvent the wheel, start from scratch. So let's build some knowledge and let some centralized teams carry those lessons learned forward into new elements. So that's building that internal expertise and having some consistency in those teams. Talk to lots of people, get lots of stakeholders, involve your quality groups, involve patients, get everybody's eyes on the proposed solution and the oversight plan. Have we thought of all the risks? Is there anything else we could be doing to manage those risks? Those are great conversations we have. And all of that being said, I'm a big believer in trying new things. So do try new things, just go cautiously. And I would say incrementally, step by step. Don't change everything all at once, change a little bit at a time. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you. We are very honored and grateful for opportunity to interview you.